Chapter 17, The Seduction of Pessimism. This is an important chapter because we as human beings, we tend to tune in more to bad news, to more pessimistic types of things. And the author in this chapter really does a good job at kind of illustrating how important it is to remain optimistic over the long term, especially when it comes to money. So I think one of the most important quotes that he has in this chapter is that expecting things to be bad is the best way to be pleasantly surprised when they're not. When it comes to financial markets, markets can move up huge quantities, but moving up, just like growth in general, tends to take a long time. However, destruction can happen in an instant. So the human mind and the way that we're hardwired is we're more sensitive to threats than we are to opportunities. And that's kept us alive. That's just a basic kind of instinct with respect to people, is that we're going to tune into threats because threats could kill us. And we're not going to pay as much in the way of attention to opportunities because, okay, that's great. We kind of expect that. So, if the market goes up 140% over 5 years, nobody cares. Nobody notices. Okay, that's what's supposed to happen. The markets go up. But if the market goes down 40% in 3 to 6 months, everybody pays attention to that. And money is a funny thing because even though most Americans don't really have a whole lot of equity investments, the news about what happens in the economy and what happens on Wall Street and with respect to stocks and financial instruments tends to happen to everyone. So everybody pays attention to this. So there are two items that the author puts in kind of a juxtaposition to one another, where he talks about health and money. So health, by and large, an individual's decision when it comes to health is going to affect, by and large, them. It's a personal decision. It's going to affect they alone. When it comes to money, just a few people and bad decisions made by a few people can affect a huge group of people. Take a look at the great financial crisis and the decisions with respect to certain Wall Street firms about some of the different derivatives that ended up tanking the entire market and having some major Wall Street firms go out of business. Decisions by a few affect the many. So money is more systemic. And that's why people are more tuned into the negative returns and what possibly could happen in the way of risk or loss than they are tuned into opportunities for that money to be able to grow over time. So he uses a couple of really good examples about how people are more tuned into the pessimistic side of things than the optimistic side of things. And it's the Wright brothers. In 1905, they invented the airplane. They were able to fly. It went unnoticed by and large for 3 years because people by and large said, well, it's impossible. Look, nature doesn't have an organism that weighs more than 50 pounds that can take flight. That's the kind of cutoff with respect to nature. You can't have anything weighing more than 50 pounds to actually take flight. But Orville and Wilbur figured it out. And they were flying around. And it took 3 years for it to take off. And then after that happened, they'll never be any commercial flights. But then a short time after that, commercial flights happened. One of the key points he makes in this chapter is that there's a lot of underestimation when it comes to adaptation. I've seen this firsthand. I've guided clients through the technology bubble bursting in the turn of the century, also the great financial crisis and through COVID. And guilty as charged, I too tend to fall into these types of pessimistic traps and focus on some of the things that are happening that are more negative now than focusing maybe on the longer term trend of things. And people's, thoughts on things, human nature hasn't changed for thousands of years, although we may think it's different this time. And there are obviously some key things that make our civilization different than like the ancient Egyptian or the Roman civilization, but human nature hasn't changed. All the way going back to the time of the Caesars, the pharaohs, all the way to now. The only difference is this medium that we're on right now. It is the opportunity for information to be transmitted instantaneously all over planet Earth. And it's just data and information. I'll leave it at that. Because facts and truth, there are no facts. There is no truth any longer. It's just data. And it's the interpretation of that data. And a lot of marketers know and understand very, very well that bad news sells. It's always bad news. The headline news is always bad news. That's what they do. They use it to draw attention. They use it to get eyeballs, to be able to see the advertisements that the firms that are paying for that advertising spot are putting up there to sell their goods and services. So if we recognize this and we're able to kind of just tamp it down a little bit. I think that's really where the author here is getting at. Is that, focus on growth because it's grown by compounding. So it's little things that happen over time that can lead to bigger things. The market doesn't go straight up. It takes time for things to grow. Money growing by compounding. You put money into an interest-bearing account. It's going to take time for that to be able to grow based on the rate of interest. Same thing if you invest in the total stock market index. Over time, it will compound. Warren Buffett, the most successful modern day investor, achieved these types of returns by compounding, but he got most of his wealth in the later stage of his life simply because when money grows and compounds on top of itself, that's where, a little bit of money can turn into huge sums of money. So when it comes to the seduction of pessimism, I think the takeaway for this chapter is to not underestimate the opportunity for things and people to adapt. And then also taking a look at longer term trends. For most people, over most periods of time, things get better as time goes on. We're all going to suffer setbacks. The market's going to suffer setbacks. Your career will suffer setbacks. Members of your family are going to suffer setbacks. Relationships are going to be, wrought with setbacks. It's just part of the human condition. But just because something looks bad doesn't mean it will always stay that way. There's another great quote that he has in this chapter. It says that ugly staying ugly is an easy forecast to make. It doesn't require the imagination that the world will change. So hopefully this chapter and just the summation of it helps us recognize that we're predestined or kind of hardwired to think more pessimistically about the events that happen around us. I think if we can take a step back and take a look at the bigger picture in every facet of our lives, I think looking at it for what it is, the trend over time tends to be that things tend to improve and growth happens over time.